The alert came in at 2:47 in the morning, and at first, I thought it was noise. That's what most of them are on the night desk. You get maybe 100 flags a shift, and 98 of them are somebody's aunt wiring too much money for a wedding, or a small business paying a supplier in a country the model doesn't like that week. I worked out of a building on Wall Street, 12 floors up, one of those big open floors where by 11 p.m. it's just me, a guy named Ravi 2 rows over, and the cleaning crew. January 2022. Everyone had gone remote, and then half of us had come back, and the floor still smelled like new carpet and old coffee. The heating vents rattled. You could hear the ice on the windows shifting when the wind hit. My job was simple: watch the queue. Pull anything the risk engine flagged as high priority. Read it, clear it, or escalate it. If you escalated something, you had to be right, because escalating a false positive at 3 a.m. meant somebody on the day team had to unwind it at 9, and they hated you for the rest of the quarter. So when this alert popped up, I almost cleared it on reflex. It was a wire transfer, $48,300, out of a personal account in New Jersey. Fine. Big number for a personal account, but not insane. The account was old, the customer was clean, no history. I was about to click through when the linked activity panel refreshed and I saw the tail. 4 more transactions, same amount, minus small fees. Different banks, different states, all within 11 minutes. I sat up. The money left New Jersey, hit a business account in Delaware, went out to a second personal account in Arizona, then to what looked like a small LLC in Florida, then to a nonprofit. Each hop shaved off a little bit for what the memo lines called consulting or reimbursement or nothing at all. By the time it landed, the amount was $47,910, close enough that a casual auditor wouldn't blink, different enough that it wasn't the same money on paper. I knew this pattern. Anyone on my desk knew this pattern. You learn it in the first month, layering. You break the chain of custody so that when someone eventually looks, they see 5 clean transactions instead of 1 dirty one. Except the destination account was wrong. I clicked into it, and I remember I actually said the name out loud, quietly, just to hear it. It was a refugee aid nonprofit. The kind of place that sends blankets and formula and helps people fill out visa paperwork. Their public filings were on the screen in about 10 seconds. Board of directors, all named. Audited financials from the previous year. A press release from December about a shipment of winter clothing to a camp in Eastern Europe. That's not where dirty money goes. Dirty money goes to a shell company that owns a car wash. It goes to real estate. It goes to a consulting firm in Miami that has no website and no phone number. It does not go to a nonprofit that publishes its books. I sat there for a minute, then I got up and walked over to Ravi. Come look at something. He rolled his chair back and rubbed his eyes. He was on his second cup of the tea he made in a French press at his desk, which was the kind of thing that would get you mocked on the day shift and nobody cared about at night. He came over and stood behind me and I walked him through it. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Run the destination account backward, 90 days. I did. The screen filled up, not with a few transactions, with hundreds. Same pattern every time. Layered chains, 4 or 5 hops, landing in the same nonprofit account. Origin accounts spread across the country, personal or small business, always in the low 5 figures. Jesus, Ravi said. How much? I ran the sum. It took the system a second because there were so many entries. When it came back, I stared at it, and then I looked at Ravi, and he looked at me. $2.4 million, over 3 months. Okay, he said slowly. Okay, don't touch anything else. Don't refresh. Screenshot everything, and then we file. Here's the thing that got under my skin, and it's not what you'd expect. It wasn't the money. $2 million is not a scary number in that building. I've cleared bigger flags on a routine Tuesday. It was that nobody had caught it. 90 days. Hundreds of transactions. And the reason nobody had caught it was that the destination looked good. The model was trained to flag suspicious destinations. A refugee charity with clean books and a real board didn't trip anything. The model was flagging the origin accounts one at a time, and one at a time they looked like ordinary rich uncle wires. and every night some version of me was clearing them, including me. I went back through my own cleared queue for the last 2 weeks. I found 3 of them. 3 transactions I had personally waved through that were part of this thing that I had looked at for maybe 8 seconds each and clicked the green button on because the destination was a charity. I sat there with my hand on the mouse and I did not move for a while. Ravi came back with a printed copy of the internal escalation protocol, which nobody prints, ever, but he wanted to have it in his hand while he read it to me. Freeze the chain. Do not contact the customer. Do not contact the destination. Kick it to financial intelligence with a priority 1 tag. Write the memo before you go home. I froze it. I wrote the memo. It took me an hour, and by the time I hit send, it was 5 in the morning, and the sky over the East River was starting to turn that gray color it gets in January before the sun actually comes up. Then I did something I'm not proud of. I went into the bathroom on our floor, and I stood at the sink, and I ran cold water over my wrists for a couple of minutes, and I looked at myself in the mirror, and I thought about the 3 transactions I had cleared. I thought about whoever was on the other end, sitting somewhere with a laptop, watching the money move, watching me click green, because that's what they were doing. Somebody had built this operation knowing exactly how our system worked. They knew what the model looked at. They knew what the analysts looked at. They knew that on the night shift, a tired guy would see a non-profit at the end of a chain and stop asking questions. They knew my job better than I did. I went home and I did not sleep. I lay on top of the covers with my clothes on, and I listened to the radiator in my apartment tick, and I thought about how many other things like this were probably running, right now, through other desks, in other buildings, and how the only reason I had caught this one was that Ravi had told me to run the destination backward, and I had never thought to do that on my own. The investigation took about 6 weeks. I didn't hear most of it in real time. Financial intelligence doesn't loop you in. Every so often, somebody from the day team would stop by my desk and ask a clarifying question, and I would answer it, and they would leave. Once, a woman I had never met came up and said, "You're the guy who caught the charity thing." And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Good job," and walked away. That was it. What I found out later, in pieces, was this. The nonprofit was real. The board was real. The winter clothing shipment was real. Everything about it was exactly what it looked like. What had happened was that someone had gotten into their treasury system months earlier through a phishing email sent to their bookkeeper. Not a sophisticated attack. A fake invoice from what looked like their internet provider. She had clicked it. She had entered her credentials. She had gone home and made dinner. From that point on, someone had access to the account. Not to steal from it, to use it as a landing pad. Money would come in from the layered chains, sit for a day or 2, and then get pushed back out through a channel the bookkeeper never looked at, because it wasn't part of her normal workflow. The dashboard she opened every morning didn't show it. The reports she signed off on didn't include it. The account was being used as a laundry, and the people running the laundry had been careful to keep it looking clean from the inside. When the investigators walked into the nonprofit's offices in March and explained what had been happening, the executive director sat down on the floor. That's what I heard anyway, from one of the day team guys who had been there. She sat down on the floor in her own conference room and put her hands over her face and didn't say anything for a long time. She thought they were there to shut her down. She thought she was going to be arrested. She had spent 11 years building that organization. They didn't shut her down. They walked her through it, showed her the compromised access and the outbound channel her bookkeeper had never seen. Her IT contractor closed the hole that afternoon. The funds that hadn't been pushed back out yet, about 600,000 of the 2.4, got returned to the origin accounts. The rest was gone, into wherever it had been going, and that part is not my department, and I never learned where. I still work the night desk. Different building now, same job. I don't clear a destination just because it looks clean. I run everything backward. Ravi taught me that, and I've taught it to the 2 people who came on after me, and they think I'm annoying about it, and that's fine. Sometimes at 3 in the morning, when the floor is empty and the vents are rattling, I picture the bookkeeper opening that email. Just a normal Tuesday for her. She clicked the link, and she went home and made dinner, and for months after that, every time she signed off on the books, The books were lying to her, and she had no way of knowing. The job that still bothers me came through email in early May of 2021. A woman named Colleen, up in Vermont, had a piece that used to sit in her grandfather's study. An 18th century secretary desk, mahogany, tall as a man with the hood closed. She wanted it stripped, repaired where the veneer had bubbled, and refinished in shellac the old way. She was willing to pay for 2 full days of work at her place because she didn't want it out of the house. I do about 40 of these house calls a year. Most of the time, it's people who inherited something and don't know what they've got. Occasionally, it's the opposite, and Colleen was the opposite. She knew the piece down to the drawer pulls. Federal era, Boston, probably the shop of a guy whose name I won't butcher here. She had provenance papers going back 4 generations. That's rare. Her place was off Route 100, past Weston, at the end of a dirt road that turned to washboard for the last mile. Old farmhouse, white clapboard, the porch sagging just enough that you noticed, but not enough to worry about. 2 big sugar maples in the front yard, still that pale, early May green that only lasts a couple of weeks up there. I remember the light because there wasn't much of it. Overcast day, the kind where you keep checking the sky to see if it's about to rain. Colleen was maybe 60. She met me in the driveway with coffee already poured into a mug for me, and she showed me to the front parlor. There it was, against the north wall, covered by a canvas drop cloth she pulled off with both hands like she was unveiling something at a museum. It was a beautiful piece. Serpentine drawer fronts, brass escutcheons, the original wavy glass in the bookcase doors above. The finish was gone in 100 places. Someone in the 50s had wiped it down with linseed oil for decades, and it had gone black and gummy. That was the main job, getting that off without touching the wood underneath. I set up on a canvas tarp, laid out my tools on a folding table, and started with the top section, working down. Colleen brought me a sandwich around 1, and then left me alone. Said she'd be out back in the garden. I could hear her sometimes, faintly, moving a wheelbarrow around behind the house. The work was slow, and it was clean work, the kind I like. Denatured alcohol on a rag, small patches at a time. The smell of it filled the room, sharp and medicinal, mixed with the older smell that comes off any piece that's been closed up a long time. Dust and paper and something like a spice cabinet. By 4 in the afternoon, I'd worked my way down to the lower case, the part with the 3 graduated drawers. I pulled them out to clean the runners. The bottom drawer was the deepest, and when I lifted it out, I could feel that the weight wasn't right. Not for an empty drawer. Anyone who does this work long enough knows about secret compartments. They're common in high-end federal pieces. Cabinet makers built them in because their clients asked for them, to hide letters or money or, later on, wills. I've found maybe a dozen over the years. Usually there's nothing in them. Once I found a dried out cigar. Once a receipt from a hardware store dated 1911. This one was behind the back panel of the drawer, accessed by pressing up on a small block glued to the underside. I found it because I was checking the runners, felt the block, and pressed it out of habit. The false back dropped forward on a little cloth hinge. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper, cream-colored, foxed at the edges. It had been folded 3 times, and it had been in there long enough that the folds were permanent. I sat on the floor and opened it. I remember thinking it was probably a letter between family members, and I'd hand it to Colleen when we were done, and she'd cry about it, and that would be the end of the story. The handwriting was that copper plate script you see in 19th century letters. Brown ink, tidy, slanted right. Dated in the upper right corner in the same hand. May 14th, 1887. The salutation was my first name, not a nickname, not an initial. My first name, spelled the way it's spelled now, which isn't the way it would have been spelled in 1887 if it had been spelled at all. My name isn't rare, but it isn't old either. I stared at it for a while. My brain kept trying to make it be a coincidence, some other person with the same name. And then I read the next line, and it wasn't. The letter described my day, not in general, in detail. It said I had driven up from the south that morning, and that I had stopped once for gas at a station with a red awning. I had, off exit 6, near Bellows Falls. It said I was wearing a gray work shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow. I was. It said I had spilled a little coffee on the tarp near the leg of the folding table, and to check. And I did, and there was the stain, still tacky. It described the sandwich Colleen had brought me. Turkey, tomato, no mayo, on sourdough. It said I had eaten half of it and left the crusts on the plate on the windowsill. The plate was on the windowsill. The crusts were on the plate. It said I would find this letter around 4 in the afternoon by pressing a block on the underside of the bottom drawer. It said I would sit on the floor to read it. I was sitting on the floor. I don't remember standing up. I remember I was leaning against the wall by then, holding the letter with both hands, and my mouth was dry. I'd always assumed if something like this ever happened to me, it would come with a jolt of fear. It didn't. What I felt was closer to the feeling you get when you realize you've been watched for a long time and only now noticed. The letter went on. It described the rest of my afternoon. It said I would finish the top of the lower case by 6 and pack up by 6:30 and eat dinner at a diner in Ludlow on the way home. It said the waitress there would call me Hun. There was no signature, no closing line. It ended in the middle of a sentence about the light in the room. I folded the letter back along its old creases, and I put it in the inside pocket of my jacket, which was hanging on a chair in the hall. I didn't think about it, I just did it. I went back into the parlor and I finished the lower case by 6 and packed up by 6:30. I told Colleen I'd be back the next morning to do the shellac. She thanked me and gave me a check for the first day. I stopped at the diner in Ludlow. The waitress called me Hun. I ordered eggs because I couldn't think about anything else. I sat in the booth and I could feel the letter in my jacket pocket the way you feel a phone buzzing that hasn't buzzed. The next day I drove back up and I finished the job. Shellac in thin coats, exactly the way I'd told her I would. I didn't say anything about the letter. I didn't leave it in the desk. I don't have a good reason for that. She paid me, we shook hands, and I drove home. A few weeks later, I gave the letter to a woman in Amherst who does authentication work for auction houses. I told her I'd found it in a piece, and I wanted to know if it was period. She kept it for 3 weeks. When I picked it up, she had a folder for me with the tests she'd run. The paper was rag stock, consistent with mid to late 19th century American production. The ink was iron gall, also consistent. Nothing about the physical letter was newer than the 1890s. She asked me who wrote it. I said I didn't know. She said the hand didn't match any commercial script sample she had on file, which was unusual because most people learned to write from the same 3 or 4 copybooks back then. She said it looked like someone who had learned to write from one of those books and then, over the years, drifted away from it. She didn't ask about the content. I hadn't shown her the content. She'd only tested a corner. I've kept the letter in the top drawer of my desk since June of 2021. I take it out sometimes, not often, maybe once every couple of months, when the house is quiet. I read it through. There's nothing in it that means me any harm. There are no warnings. Nothing tells me to do anything or not do anything. It's just an account of one Thursday in May, written by someone who was very careful about getting the details right, and who wrote it down more than 100 years before that Thursday happened. The part that gets me isn't the accuracy, it's the tone. Whoever wrote it wasn't excited. They weren't trying to prove anything. They wrote it the way you'd write down what you had for breakfast if someone asked you, and you couldn't figure out why they were asking. I did the job. I ate the sandwich. I sat on the floor. Somebody watched me do all of it, in ink, in 1887. I moved back to Louisville in November 2021 to take care of my mother. She'd been slipping for about 2 years by then, but in the fall, she stopped recognizing my aunt, and that was the line for us. I gave up the lease on my apartment in Cincinnati, packed the car, and drove down to the house I grew up in on the south side of town, off Taylor Boulevard near Iroquois Park. By March 2022, she was mostly bedridden, late-stage dementia. She could still eat if I fed her, still squeezed my hand sometimes, but the words were gone. What came out was a soft kind of humming, or half sentences that trailed off. The one with the, and then nothing. She'd look at the ceiling like she'd lost her train of thought and would never find it again. I set up a hospital bed for her in the front room because the stairs were too much. I slept in the room across the hall with the door cracked so I could hear her if she needed anything. Baby monitor on the nightstand, blue LED light glowing at me every time I opened my eyes. The house is old, built in the 50s, wood floors that pop when the temperature drops, radiators that clank in the morning, that kind of thing. I knew every one of those sounds by heart. I grew up with them. The first time I heard her talking, I thought I was dreaming. It was maybe 2:40 in the morning. I remember because I looked at my phone after. I was lying on my side, half awake, and I heard her voice through the monitor. Not the humming, not the trailing half sentences, actual talking, a full sentence, clear as anything. Well, you know how he was about the car. I sat up. My first thought was that I'd left the TV on for her, which I sometimes did on low volume, but I hadn't. I'd turned it off before bed. I sat there listening, and after a few seconds, she laughed. A small, warm laugh. Like something someone said had struck her as funny in a familiar way. Then she said, No, that was the other summer. I got out of bed and walked across the hall. The floorboard by her door creaks. I stopped before I got to it, because part of me didn't want her to know I was coming. I stood there in the dark hallway and listened. She was answering somebody. That's the only way I can describe it. There'd be a beat of quiet, and then she'd say something back. I did, yeah. Oh, stop it. Like a phone call where you can only hear one side. I pushed the door open. The room was dark except for a strip of light under the curtain from the street lamp on the corner. She was on her back, both arms on top of the blanket, staring at the ceiling. Alone. No phone, no television, no radio. The monitor camera on the dresser blinking its little green light. When the door opened, she went quiet. She turned her head, very slowly, and looked at me. Not confused. Not the vague looking through you way she'd been looking at me for months. She looked at me like she knew exactly who I was and exactly what I was doing there. She held it for maybe 5 seconds. Then she rolled her head back to face the ceiling and closed her eyes. I stood there for a long time. I remember I felt cold in the backs of my knees, if that makes sense. I said, "Mom?" She didn't respond. Her breathing evened out. I checked her pulse, checked the bed, checked the closet like an idiot. Nothing. I told myself she'd been dreaming out loud. People do that. Old people especially. The next night, it happened again, at almost the same time. I lay in bed with the monitor turned up. Around 2:30, I heard the humming start. Just the usual soft noise she makes in her sleep. Then it stopped. There was a long pause. And then, in a normal, awake tone of voice, she said, "That's what I told her," but she wouldn't listen. I didn't move. I was afraid if I got up, she'd stop. She talked for maybe 6 or 7 minutes. I couldn't catch everything through the monitor. She said something about a green kitchen. She said, "You always did that." She laughed twice. Once, she said a name I couldn't make out, but it was 2 syllables. When I finally got up and went to the door, the same thing happened. I stepped into the room, and she went silent. She turned her head. She looked at me. She closed her eyes. I sat in the kitchen after that and drank water out of a coffee mug and tried to think. This is a woman who, that same afternoon, hadn't been able to tell me if she wanted applesauce or yogurt, who forgot my name in October and hasn't used it since, who cries sometimes because she doesn't know where she is even though she's in the bed she's slept in for 40 years. And at 2:30 in the morning, she was making jokes. I called her doctor the next day. Her regular one, a woman she'd seen for a decade at Norton. I sat on the back porch with the phone and told her the whole thing. The clear speech, the laughter, the way she went quiet when I came in. The doctor was quiet for a second, and then she said, "I want to tell you about something called terminal lucidity, or paradoxical lucidity. We don't fully understand it. She explained that in some patients with advanced dementia, there are windows where the person seems to come back. Sometimes it's minutes, sometimes longer. It often happens at night. The brain works differently in those hours, she said. Old pathways can reopen for a little while, and then close again by morning. It doesn't mean recovery. It's more like a light flickering on in a house nobody lives in anymore. I asked her the part I'd been sitting on for 2 days. Who is my mother talking to? She said, that we don't know. It could be a memory that feels present to her. It could be something we don't have good language for. But if she's calm and she's not distressed, my honest advice is not to interrupt it. I said, okay. I thanked her. I hung up and sat on the porch a while longer, watching a robin pull at something in the grass. That night I did what she said. I lay in bed until the monitor picked up her voice, and instead of going to the door, I got up and walked into the hallway in my socks and sat down against the wall outside her room, close enough to hear, not close enough to be a shape in her doorway. She was mid-sentence when I got there, and the door on the passenger side. You remember, you had to slam it twice. Pause. I did. I said that. Pause. A soft laugh. Oh, Dennis. Stop. I stopped breathing for a second. My father's name was Dennis. He passed in 2010. Heart attack. At the kitchen table on a Tuesday. My mother found him. She was the one who called the ambulance and sat with him on the linoleum until they got there. She talked about it in the years after, only when she absolutely had to. She was talking to him. I sat against that wall for I don't know how long. She kept going. She said something about a trip they took to Gatlinburg the year I was born. She mentioned a dog we had when I was little, a beagle named Sadie, who I hadn't thought about in 20 years. She said, I know. I know you did. I know. At one point she said, very softly, I miss you at supper the most. I put my hand over my mouth. Eventually the talking slowed. There were longer gaps between the sentences, then just the humming again, then quiet. I got up and went back to bed. I didn't go in to check on her. I didn't want her to see me. It kept happening, most nights, for about 3 weeks. Not always at the same time, not always for the same length. Some nights it was 30 seconds and she was gone again. Some nights it was almost half an hour. I stopped trying to catch her at it. I stopped opening the door. I'd sit in the hallway or lie in bed with the monitor turned down low and let her have it. She talked to him about groceries, about a neighbor of theirs from the 80s who I've never heard of, about the wallpaper in the first apartment they rented after they got married. She scolded him once, in a soft way, for something I couldn't make out. She laughed at things he apparently said. She used a tone of voice I hadn't heard from her since I was maybe 12 years old. She never called out for me during those hours. She never sounded afraid. In the daytime, she was the same as before. Blank, small. Sometimes she'd look at me and there'd be a flicker of something, like she was about to say a word, and then it would slide off her face and she'd go back to the ceiling. I told my aunt about it once, over the phone. She cried. She said, well, maybe he came to get her ready. I don't know about that. I'm not a religious person, and my mother wasn't either. The doctor's version makes more sense to me. A brain doing its last strange work in the dark. But I'll tell you the truth. There were nights I sat in that hallway with my back against the drywall and my knees up, listening to my mother laugh at something my dead father said, and I stopped caring which explanation was the right one. She passed in early June, in her sleep, around 3 in the morning, according to the coroner. I like to think she wasn't alone when it happened, whatever that means.